You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Tim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have one of my all-time favorite guests back on the show with me today, Peter Swanson. I think this is our fifth year running to do a show together. Peter has
been a number of them, yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite a few. Peter's brand new book that when you're hearing this show will be available everywhere. It's called 9 Lives. And, you know, every year you just up the ante and you ratchet up the tension. And I just love it even more. 9 Lives, I know it's only March. One of my all-time favorite books of the year. I know it's going to make my, my top 10 books of the year when this year's over, because it's one of those stories that just hangs with you when you finish it. And that's what we all want from a book, right? Characters and a plot that just sticks with us when it's over with and you can't stop thinking about it. Anyway, all of that said, welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks for having me once again.
Absolutely. Peter, is this your 8th book?
It is. That's confusingly called 9 Lives. And then I did have a book called 8 Perfect Murders, and that was my 7th book. So I'm slightly off. I should have had another book before this too. But yes, it's my eighth book, which is kind of stunning to me.
That aspect of it didn't even dawn on me until you just said that. But yes, 8 Perfect Murders was your 7th book, and 9 Lives is your 8th. That's so funny. When I got the book, I got an arc from your publisher, and I was like, oh, a new Peter Swanson book. This is going to be fun. And it blows my mind each time that a new book of yours comes out, that they're all so different. Yet there's still this thread that runs through all of your stories, and I've struggled to kind of put my finger on it, but it's evident that you are a lover of the genre. You really love mystery stories. Where does that come from?
It just comes from really just being an avid reader as a kid, and falling in love with mystery stories really young. I think I went down the usual route, which is, I think, Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. And maybe before then, even like Encyclopedia Brown, or even before that, maybe picture books like Mercer Mirror. I was like sort of slightly creepy stuff. So monsters and things like that, and dark images, and then I hit the detective stuff that you first get when you're, a young reader, and I love that stuff. And then started reading the adult stuff that my parents had around the house quite young, and I love that. So even though I will read, I do read outside of the genre, not that much. I tend to pick up mysteries when I'm picking out my next book, but I read some literary stuff. I read poetry, but yeah, I just never, I've always loved it, and I particularly love going back and reading, the great sort of mid-century crime novels, the golden age stuff from England, and I like the mid-century American stuff too, some of the hard-boiled stuff, and those great paperbacks when they were, all those writers cranking out paperbacks in the 50s and 60s. I love all that stuff.
While neither one of us are psychologists, I do like to kind of explore some of the armchair psychology that, that kind of goes along with why we resonate with certain genres. Mystery stories are consistently some of the hottest sellers. It's just something that I think the vast majority of us love a good mystery. And and love to read in the genre. Why do you think these kinds of stories just resonate with readers so deeply?
Yeah, I mean, I have I'm interested in that subject myself, and I've so I know other people's sort of opinions on that, and I don't have a definitive answer, but I do know that some of it is that there's something actually comforting about a crime story. If you think of a traditional crime story, we'll go, to a sort of an Agatha Christie type thing, where you have a town that is upset. A moral order is upset by a murder, usually in the very beginning. And
Yeah.
it's almost like evil has descended upon the town. And then along comes a figure who is either a detective or could be a smart old lady like Miss Marple, or could be anyone, really. Could be a priest. But they tend to be sort of almost like a religious figure, in that they return they find out the wrongdoer, and they return the town to its sort of original state. So there's something comforting about that when the crime is solved. I don't think it's just that, though, because I think so. For instance, Nine Lives is sort of inspired by what I think of Agatha Christie's best book, and Then There Were None, and that is a book where no redeeming figure comes along and sets the world to rights. So why is that book so popular? So I think there's a less fancy version of the psychology, and some of that is when we read about dark things happening to other people, they're not happening to us. I mean, we're hopefully home, tucked up in our chair, enjoying a creepy story, but we're in the safety of our home. So maybe, and there's a fascination to the dark side. So it kind of it's a way to let us into that part of the world without us being in immediate danger. So I think there's a comfort in that as well.
Several of your books have been have sort of tipped the hat to a a standard of the genre, if you will. And Nine Lives, I think it's fascinating that you were thinking of that Agatha Christie story in the beginning. Do stories begin that way for you a lot of the time? Are you thinking about the way someone has done something in the past, and you start thinking about, I wonder if I could take this genre trope or whatever and maybe turn it on its head or something? Or is there a character that walks onto the stage of your mind, or like what's that kernel of inspiration usually like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from different places, but I mean, I think a way to think about it is I am coming at my writing career as being heavily inspired by other crime novels and looking to sort of do my own versions of them. It makes sense because I don't, for instance, some people who write crime novels were involved in, the field of detection. They might be an ex-police officer or something, and then they would come at it very differently.
Yeah.
Or they might be a journalist who was on the crime beat. I think sort of Michael Connelly comes from that. Who you might be pulling them from actual, like, real crimes that are happening. I don't have any connection with that world. I don't necessarily want any connection with that world. So sort of my ideas do tend to come from books that I love. For something like Nine Lives, I always wanted to do the type of story where a group of strangers are gathered and then get killed off one by one. And I think what always held me back was that it was, where are you going to put these strangers? If you put them on an island, that's been done. If you put them in a snowbound hotel, that's been done. If you put them on a train, that's been done. I mean, they're all done by Agatha Christie. But there's something sort of creaky about that. Not that it couldn't be done well, but I was always held back a little bit when I was thinking about this genre. And then I came up with this idea of, what if they just received a list? They weren't put anywhere, but essentially when they receive this list, it marks them for death, and it kind of, in a way, puts them on this figurative island where someone's you don't know who. So as soon as I had that idea, it kind of cracked for me. And I was like, oh, that's a story I kind of want to tell. And then, it's just months and months of sort of daydreaming about it and imagining what the story might be like before I eventually, decide to sit down and try and write it.
And the fact that we live in the 21st century kind of closes the scope of reality, because you can have a list of people and get some of the same effects as people being in close proximity, because we do have ways that connect us as a society now, and that brings a whole other aspect to the story, that you can have these seemingly completely unrelated people, but still have ways to kind of close those gaps.
Well, and one of the early things that happens is, for the 9 strangers that receive the list, some of them don't even really pay attention to it. Some of them become quite obsessed with it. But one of the things that they sort of all seem to do is Google the names, of course,
right,
to try and find out who these other people are and find out what their connection is. And there is a connection between them. So I think there's a couple different ways to go with these golden age plots. And locked room mysteries and things like that is, you either got to set it in the past, or you got to find a way to do it in the present and sort of embrace the technology, because, it's tricky. It does change things that, people now have cell phones. So when they're isolated, you're never that isolated. And there's only so many times in a novel you can put someone out of cell phone range before it begins to look like it's just a cop-out. So I think the way to do it is to sort of say, what I was interested in this one, I mean, you always think in these stories that, if you're trapped on an island with a killer, all you have to do is get off the island and then you'll be safe. In this story, there's this sort of, this killer that seems almost supernatural in the ability to off these people. So there is no escape. I mean, you have all the technology in the world, you even have police protection, and it might not be enough. So I kind of like that idea too. But yeah, and someone out there, I don't think it's going to be me, is going to write maybe a really good mystery thriller that has, the COVID crisis in Zoom and all the sort of interactions people are now making online. I mean, I think of, Zoom, there could be, something in someone's background behind them on the Zoom call that gives something away. I mean, I think you either got to embrace it, or the other thing is, set it back before 1980, because that there's no right answer. I mean, but we are in a different time now. And in the past 100 years, things have changed quite a bit.
For sure. You mentioned a minute ago, Peter, what your the early process of a book is, that you start daydreaming of ways that it could work, and it sounds to me like that is a part of your pre-writing process. What does that kind of phase look like for you? Do you give yourself a certain amount of time in the year to start kind of ruminating on story ideas? And then what does that look like when you actually start to sit down and write? With 8 books in, have you kind of fallen into a sort of routine when it comes to the new story dreaming process?
I don't have a yearly routine. I know that other authors who are often on the book a year might like always write their novel from January to, June or something. And then the rest of the year is like them thinking up the next idea plus doing book tours or whatever. I don't have that. I mean, I write them at different times. But I'm always sort of ruminating on ideas. So it's just a matter of, if I'm lucky, like right now, my next book is done. So I'm in pretty good shape to get, my next one written in time. So I'm not worried about it. I mean, it all depends on where your deadline is. But I always have sort of a number of ideas floating in my head, and I think of them as sort of in competition. And it's not a forced competition. I just let it happen naturally. Like eventually one will sort of emerge as the one that I'm thinking about the most. And then, hopefully when things are going well, I as I'm thinking about this idea, it always starts as sort of a premise. So if it's simply, like 9 people get a list, and then I'm like, oh, I wonder what those people are like. I wonder why someone would do this. And I just start having these imaginations. I don't write anything down. I just let it happen. And then at some point, I have enough in my head that I need to start writing it out. Doesn't mean I have the whole plot in my head.
Sure.
But I mean, eventually one story idea will kind of push another story idea away. And that's when I'm sort of ready to start writing. And, and I've had all sorts of things, I have a couple half novels that, because I don't plot them out in advance, I've had some written half a book and, kind of hit a dead end, or, I didn't know where to go from there. It's the risk you take. And that's okay. I mean, again, it all depends on your deadline. If I have a strong deadline, I have to push through. But yeah, no, it's so that's how I do it. The important thing for me is to be excited when I'm writing it, that I'm excited about the story, that I'm not forcing it. And hopefully my theory behind that is that if I'm excited by the story, someone else will be as well.
Things We Never Got Over, the new book by best-selling author Lucy Score. Bearded bad boy barber Knox refers to live his life the way he takes his coffee, alone, unless you count his basset hound Waylon. Knox doesn't tolerate drama even when it comes in the form of a stranded runaway bride. Naomi wasn't just running away from her wedding. She was riding to the rescue of her estranged twin to Knockemout, Virginia, a rough-around-the-edges town where disputes are settled the old-fashioned way, with fist and beer, usually in that order. Too bad for Naomi, her evil twin hasn't changed at all. After helping herself to Naomi's car and cash, Tina leaves her with something unexpected, the niece Naomi didn't know she had. Now she's stuck in town with no car, no job, no plan, and no home, with an 11-year-old going on 30 to take care of. There's a reason Knox doesn't do complications or high-maintenance women, especially not the romantic ones. But since Naomi's life imploded right in front of him, the least he can do is help her out of her jam. And just as soon as she stops getting into new trouble, he can leave her alone and get back to his peaceful, solitary life. At least that's the plan until the trouble turns to real danger. Things We Never Got Over, the new book by best-selling author Lucy Score. An Innocent Client, the first book in the Joe Dillard legal thriller series. A preacher is found brutally murdered in a Tennessee motel room. A beautiful, mysterious young girl is accused. In this best-selling debut, criminal defense lawyer Joe Dillard has become jaded over the years as he's tried to balance his career against his conscience. Savvy but cynical, Dillard wants to quit doing criminal defense, but he can't resist the chance to represent someone who might actually be innocent. His drug-addicted sister has just been released from prison, and his mother is succumbing to Alzheimer's, but Dillard's commitment to the case never wavers despite the personal troubles and professional demands that threaten to destroy him. Chosen by BookBub readers as one of the top 100 crime novels of all time, get started on this great series with An Innocent Client, where it all started. Read for free with Kindle Unlimited or buy it in paperback or audiobook. An Innocent Client by Scott Pratt.
That reminds me of a video that I saw a while back with fantasy author Brandon Sanderson, who has made a lot of news lately with his Kickstarter. That's neither here nor there, but he was doing some sort of conference, and he said that, we all think of stories that come out and they have a certain history, but what about the stories those stories that are written? What about the stories that get pushed out of the way that may never see the light of day because this one won out? And when you start talking about how there's sort of a competition of story ideas that happen, do you ever think of the things that didn't come to pass because 9 Lives won out, or or do you ever go back and revisit some of those ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it all the time because sometimes I live with these ideas for a while and then they just disappear. I mean, I have stuff pretty heavily plotted out in my mind, and and again, I have those orphaned novels, and I will come back. I mean, weirdly, Nine Lives, Nine Lives got orphaned at one point, actually. Nine Lives was not one of those books that I just started and 3 months later I had a draft and then sent it to my agent and it was going to be my next book. Like at one point, I started it and what happened when it went wrong for me was there's one of the people on the list is an FBI agent, and she starts using the resources of the FBI to investigate, her own mystery.
Yeah.
And at one point in the story, the whole thing started tilting towards the FBI, and it's not my type of story. It became very much a procedural, whereas I wanted to write more about these people and what it feels like to be marked for death. But when I returned to it, and then I sort of had an idea of how to return to it and return it to that type of story, and I went back and did that. But I initially wrote it as a much shorter novel, in fact, closer to a novella. I wrote it very fast, and then sent it to my agent. And my agent sort of said, "Oh, I think there's enough here. I can see here, places where you could expand, and we could make this into a novel." So I started thinking about that and got excited about it again. Again, it's like about excitement. So I was like, oh, I could add this, or I could add this character, or I could have more stuff happening with this person. And as soon as all that came in, so it was not this book was around for a while, and both on the paper and in my head. But yeah, I do have, I can think back right now. I mean, I won't say what they were, but I can think back to some oddball novels that sort of intrigued me for a while.
So one of the things that really intrigued me about Nine Lives, Peter, and this is when I didn't know anything about the story. I just knew that it's a new Peter Swanson book that's coming out this spring, and there's a certain excitement because I know you and I know what to expect from your mind. But you open a book and you just start flipping through, and you expect, because this is the way novels usually work, that we're going to have a chapter progression from, say, chapter 1 through chapter 50 or whatever, and you expect the story to flow a certain way. Nine Lives, immediately, one of the first things I noticed when I didn't know anything about the story was that the chapters were broken down in this weird progression where there was like chapter, or almost like section 1, and then several chapters, and then you get section 2, and they start counting all over again at number 1, and I was like, ooh, what is Peter doing in this book? And then I had to know, and then when you start reading, you understand how the story is broken up and why you decided to do that. But for all the people listening who have no idea what I'm talking about, talk a little bit about why you decided to structure the book like that and what that means.
Well, we got the parts. I mean, if they go backwards, so the first part is titled 9, and then as soon as I sort of came up with that, so we're whittling down the list. Picture. I mean, I think I had a working title for this book was what's the it just went out of my head. What's the name? What's the game where the chairs get removed?
The musical chairs.
Musical chairs. Yeah. So this is, and I kind of love this. This is what I wanted to evoke. And again, it's the classic Agatha Christie type story. I love these stories where people start getting knocked off one by one, because there's a lot of little suspenseful things that don't necessarily relate to the killer. So there's always the mystery of who the killer is. Is the killer one of them? And why is the killer doing this? So there's that mystery. But then there's this whole other mystery that I think if you like this genre or in movies or books, which is who's going to go next? like who's the first victim, who's the second victim. I think we've all played that game in sort of slasher flicks, and in fact, it's become a thing. Like, we all know what a final girl is now, the survivor of the story. We kind of know who the early victim is going to be. They're quick to identify. I mean, these are tropes. So if there's the drunken fool at the beginning of the slasher flick, they're going to go early. So I tried really hard in this book to kind of try and mess up the way people might go. So I tried to like make it look like some of them might last longer than they do, and some of them might have gone earlier. So I had a lot of fun with this notion that as you read, it's each part of the book is counting down the people on the list. It's also my version of the figurines on the table and then there were none that keep disappearing. So
Right.
it's a visual thing for that. But yeah, I came up with that early, that to number the parts like that. And it was a lot of fun.
So one of the hallmarks of a Peter Swanson book is that you do character very, very well, and you have a way of endearing characters to the reader pretty early on, and you identify some way for us to connect with a character, and they are by no means all perfect characters. There
No.
are plenty of flaws, and there are ways that they're three-dimensional characters, but you still find a way to make me care about these characters, flaws and all. With a story like Nine Lives, it would seem like there's a plot device that is your first and foremost concern, is going through the plot device that makes up the book. Yet you still find ways to make us really care about these characters, and so the first part of that question would be, how do you cast the book with these different characters? And you alluded to a little bit of it just a minute ago, but the other side of that is, as I was reading and I really wanted to love a character or wanted to know more about him, you just kill him. And I was like, wow, Peter is not scared to kill off somebody that he just made me love 2 pages ago. Talk about casting the story with these characters.
It's funny. I again, like when I was talking about how this sort of story came about, there wasn't this moment where I was like, this is my next book and I'm going to write this novel. It was like, oh, I have this sort of quirky idea and let me throw it together and see what happens. Maybe it'll be a novella. Maybe I can write this quite fast. So when I came at it, it was kind of funny. I didn't give it a ton of thought, these characters. I knew that they had to have, I knew what they had in common a little bit. So I had some guidelines about who they might be. But other than that, I wanted them to be random, living in different parts of the country, pretty random people, some people that I don't normally, write about. And I almost just came up with them really fast. I was like, okay, oh, there'll be this person. There'll be a guy who, a sort of singer-songwriter guy in Austin, Texas. I've never written about him. They came really fast. And then that was really fun to, and they kind of stuck around. Like I didn't replace, I think there was sort of one person that I chose not to write about, but in general, like I just kind of picked them almost randomly, and that was kind of good. And then I was stuck with them. And then it's just fun to have a character and think about, I always do think about empathy, even for all my characters, what were they like as kids? What do they want right now? Are they happy people? Are they unhappy? And the thing about killing them off, and I did feel a little sad about that in some cases, but I think, if there's, I hope it's not, it's not, I didn't write necessarily a philosophical murder mystery novel, but there is this sense underneath that what's happening to these characters is going to happen to everyone, which is we're all being stalked by death. So I was kind of thinking about where are they in their life when they die, and some of them are things are getting worse, and some of them things are getting better. And I did think about that philosophy of, what kind of life do you want to live before you die? And I had some of them, their lives were getting better, and then they suddenly die. And but maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe that's how we should all go out. So I was trying to think of it that way, in terms of their deaths.
Peter, when you and I met, I think we were talking about your book, All the Beautiful Lies, at the time, which would have been 5 books ago.
Yeah.
And I love that book, and that book stands out to me as when I think of you and your work, that's one of the first things that comes to mind, and probably because that's when I was introduced to your work. Even though I had The Kind Worth Killing, I think on my Kindle, and I just hadn't gotten around to reading it yet. And I'm pretty sure I read The Kind Worth Killing right after All the Beautiful Lies, and I love that story, and it really pulled the rug out from under me, and which is what you want to happen. Looking back over your body of work, 9 Lives now, and then back to Every Vow You Break and 8 Perfect Murders, and on back to The Girl with the Clock for a Heart. When you look back over your writing career now, you're 8 books in, you've established yourself in the genre. People anticipate when a new Peter Swanson book is coming out. How do you look back on your career, and do you look back on that first book, and do you ever think, wow, if I knew then what I knew now, I might have done this differently? Or do you not allow yourself to do that, and each work stands as a representation of who I was at the time? And and not to say anything negative about that first book, because it's an amazing book, but with the benefit of 8 books published now, there's a natural growth that happens with any endeavor. How do you look back over your writing career?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think there are some things that, like, if I went back, I would do that story differently, or but I don't think that way. I mean, I think, while that might not be, I don't think my first book is a favorite of mine, but it is a favorite of mine in the sense that it was my first book.
Right.
That was when I first got a call that I was going to get published. It was about that book, and and that was the book that actually got me an agent and a publishing deal. So that will always, that happened for its reason. And then generally I just let them go. I mean, I think that is I don't think a lot about my books after they're out in the world. And so I tend to, I'm excited about something new. So, which is another idea. So I'm thinking about that. But it is, I think, one of the cool things, when you come out with your first book, you're like presenting yourself to the world. You're like, this is my book. And there's this pressure. You feel like everyone's got to love it or something. There is something nice about having a number of books out there, because, every book has maybe some detractors and some fans. It's funny. I mean, I have some, fans who quite like my books who really dislike All the Beautiful Lies. I think because of some of the subject matter. And that's fine. That's like, that's totally fine with me. It didn't work for them, but they love these other books. And then I have a bunch of people, I mean, you included, a couple of people who are like, yeah, I like all your books. So the one that I really, really love is All the Beautiful Lies. And I'm always surprised, because I think they're going to say The Kind Worth Killing, which is what most people say. Or now Perfect Murders, is people say that too. So, it's kind of nice, because, not everyone reacts differently to your books. It's not, I'm putting them out there. I'm not, trying, you can't get everyone with every book, right?
Right.
So there's something nice about that.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you had finished book 9 already. Yeah. Can you tell us anything about it? I know we're a year away from seeing it, but maybe what was your inspiration?
Yeah, well, it's my first. I'm calling it a semi-sequel. It follows up on The Kind Worth Killing, by bringing in two of those characters from that book, the detective Henry Kimball and Lily Kintner both return. But then it also introduces a new story, two new characters, Joan and Richard, who meet in high school, and then all these characters sort of converge. So it is in a way a sequel, but with a new story, but a lot more Lily in it. So that's the first time I've ever done that. I'd been asked about that a lot, and I just finally, I'd always been thinking like, oh, I would like to write some kind of sequel, and then suddenly I had the idea for it that worked. So I was excited to get back to that, and that'll be out in a year. So, yeah, I think it's we don't have an official title, but I think it might be the follow-up title, which is The Kind Worth Saving, which I like.
Yeah, you just gave me a year of sleepless nights wondering about that book. So you can rest easy knowing that now.
I like it.
Yeah. 9 Lives, when you're hearing this episode, is available everywhere now. Go grab it. You can either use the links in the show notes to grab it in Kindle edition or hardcover or audiobook. Peter, I've got to tell you, I love listening to your audiobooks. There's a different, even if I've read, a physical arc or an ebook arc, listening to the story is I get to experience it all over again. And what a great way to experience these stories. Or go visit your local bookstore, support local books, and you can grab all of Peter's books there as well. Peter, if folks are just discovering you, God forbid, at this point in your career, tell them where they can find you online and dig into all the great stuff you do.
Probably the easiest thing to do is just go to my website, which is peter-swanson.com, and then that'll have information, but it'll also link you to, I'm on Instagram and I'm on Twitter and Facebook as well.
And we'll link up all those places to make it easy for folks to find you. Peter, always a highlight of my year, not only your new book, but getting to chat with you and catch up. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of 9 Lives. Thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Thank you, Hank.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
On Walpurgis night, when the moon is high, hell's bells ring and witches must answer. They dapple their breasts with rendered fat of murdered babes, straddle their brooms and take to the sky, as the devil wills, to speed through dreamy midnight air to the summit of the Brockenberg, that haunted peak shrouded in swirling mists, where a glen of gnarled limbs and wan moonlight awaits to host their debauches and blasphemies. Now to the Brocken the witches ride. The stubble is gold and the corn is green. There shall the carnival's sabbat be seen, and the devil shall come to preside. The accuser elopes from the bowels of hell, a sure-footed, goat-headed, many-horned beast with cloven hooves and a staff of bone. He perches upon the witch altar to brood in cerulean half-light, a winged silhouette with watchful red eyes. The witches gather and bow to their master, upon his charred rump give the shameful kiss, then imps beat the drum and a round dance begins. Lash yourselves into frenzy, hags! Pass the chalice of pure marrow broth. Whip the ground with your hair, tread the sky with your feet, dance with joined hands around Satan's cold fire. Then find out a nook of nettles and moss, and lay with the rough-skinned beast of your choosing, suckling some rancid teat of desire. But hist! The cock crows. Away, away! Gather your tatters and broomsticks and wits, back to your huts, to your thresholds and hearths, and become once more, at the red break of day, the furtive adder in your neighbor's garden. The ghost host of the Salem Sorcery Tour, dazzling in his steampunk Victorian morning crepe, let the spell he'd woven trail through the twilight air like a hag across the moon, then chirped, "Isn't that silly?" and bowed, sweeping the wet grass with his satin-ribboned top hat. The tour group gave a polite round of applause. Nobody believes that stuff today, but the Puritans sure did. They took witches very seriously. If they went down in the morning and bought eggs, and one was rotten, surely the devil had come in the night, gone boop, tee-hee-hee, then scampered off on his little hooves. And who's in league with the devil? Witches. We're taught that the Puritans were super nice and cute with little buckles on their hats, but it's not the case, folks. They were fanatics. Witch hunts don't happen in a healthy society. They hated kids. They hated women. They were crazy. And that craziness. He turned on the spot, casting a protective circle around the stone garden of the witch memorial. Got these people killed.